Hi everybody, Bearded Rogue here, and today I wanted to talk about playing other people's prototypes. So, one of the things that you'll often hear me talking about is how much I love playing other people's prototypes. And that is an absolutely true statement. At Origins, I only played 2 published games, one of which was the game I was demoing for the entirety of the convention. And I kind of pride myself on that fact. Not that published games are bad or that they're horrible, but it's much easier to play published games with people outside of a convention. There are some people who just will not play unpublished games or won't try a game in its prototype format. It's also really easy to burn people out. If you are a designer and you play with the same people over and over again, some people don't want to play the same game over and over again. Even designers get burnt out playing their own games over and over again. So it's a place where if you have people who say that they're looking to play unpublished games or prototypes, it's fantastic. And a convention, you'll likely find a lot of people who are willing to play games that aren't quite ready yet. A lot of people in this hobby are very, very giving of their time and are more than willing to give you feedback. I've been very, very lucky at several conventions. I've always get at least one of my games play tested. I mean, some of the conventions like Unpub, that's the entire point. But at other conventions, there's, a world of possibility for what they could be playing, and they're sitting there playing your game. Well, I want to talk about playing other people's games because I've given a lot of talk about like what to do when you're playtesting your game, but what do you do when you're a playtester? That's something I haven't really covered, so I figured I'd do that in this video. So the first thing, when you're a playtester, is find out exactly what it is that the designer wants information on. Maybe they just want to watch people play the game. Maybe there's a specific combo that they are wanting to be looking out for, or cards that aren't quite balanced properly, or maybe there's a specific strategy they want to see how obvious it is and whether or not anybody takes it. Or maybe they're just trying to see what pieces of the game people play with and what they don't. They may want feedback on whether some things are, whether you feel some things are worth doing versus other things. There's all sorts of things that the designer could be looking for. It could just be to see how long it takes people to play the game on their first playthrough. But you should ask. Find out what it is the designer's specifically looking to test. And if there's anything that you could personally do to try to address those specific concerns. If they want to test a specific strategy, you could try implementing that specific strategy. If they want to just see how long the game takes to play, you could work on trying to play the game in a way that, facilitates it taking a little longer, perhaps. There's all sorts of things that you can do as a playtester. I'm not saying by any means be belligerent about it. You wouldn't purposefully delay or anything, but, you could ask additional questions or look for clarity where clarity isn't present. Or, instead of just going off your assumption on how something works, seeing if it works. Now, if it's a blind playtest, then you're playtesting their rules booklet as much as their game, just to make sure that their rules actually tell you how to play the game properly. So there's all sorts of reasons you could be playtesting. Ask what the designer needs. Second, and this is a big one that happens a lot with other designers, and that's don't try to redesign the person's game. You're not there for that. The designer is trying to design a particular game. They aren't looking to design a totally different game, usually. If you sit down with a designer or if you sit down with a baker and they say, hey, here's this amazing cake, you don't take a few bites of the cake or eat a piece of the cake and then tell them, wow, you really should have made a pie, and tell them ways that they can change their cake into a pie next time. That's not helpful for anyone. And it really doesn't doesn't give a lot of useful feedback to the designer. Telling a designer that, hey, I didn't prefer this, I didn't like your cake, here's how it's not cakey. Or, I'm really not a cake eater, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. I prefer pie, as most right-thinking people should. But, that's just an example of, how you can help them, because letting them know where you're coming from is also useful. Don't try to redesign their game. Don't try to turn it into something that it's not. But also giving them a frame of reference. If you're a heavy war game player and it's a light take that game, you're going to have a different opinion than somebody who plays Munchkin every week. If you are into really, thematic, storyline driven, American style games with lots of dice, and it's a economic resource management Euro game, let them know that your feedback will be different than somebody who has that kind of style. You don't need to give them an autobiography, but when you're giving them your feedback, keep in mind what kind of game they're designing and give them a frame of reference from where your feedback comes from. I find that to be incredibly useful. If you're a Magic player and the game has no cards in it, doesn't mean you're not going to like it. It doesn't mean you're not going to be good at it. But it does mean that your frame of reference is different than somebody who plays games that are more like the game that you're actually playing. Also, don't be afraid as a playtester to try something that you don't think you will like. One of the things that's very freeing to me about prototype designs and about playtests in general is that a lot of playtests don't have to play to completion. As a designer, I know this. If I've seen enough, we can just call it and be done with it. So it doesn't have to be a full-time commitment. If it is, that's great, but it's kind of freeing to have a game where I know that I'm going to sit down and play, and if it doesn't go well, we won't continue. Whereas with a lot of published games, players kind of expect you to stick it out to the end. I know that there's some people who will accept concessions and things like that, and two-player games are really good for that because you only have to have the other person across the table accept your concession. Whereas in multiplayer games, there has to be kind of a consensus as to what we do around the table. Most playtest games, if it's not going well, we don't have to keep going. And usually it's better if we don't. If you're having an absolutely miserable experience playing a game, by all means, let them know. They can jump into your spot, or the game can be called, and we can, you can move on from there. Most people who are looking for people to playtest their games are hoping that people will like their games, but a playtest is not about liking the game or not liking the game. A playtest is about whether or not the game creates the experience that the designer wanted it to create. Some people aren't going to like that experience. That's just the nature of the beast. I don't like the experience of Munchkin, personally. I think it delivers on its experience quite well, but it's not an experience I personally, as a player, am interested in having. That doesn't mean it's a bad game. That doesn't mean if I sat down to play test Munchkin that my opinion would be the sole arbiter of, what needs to change in it. I could tell them what they would change to make it a game I would want to play, or an experience I would want to play, but that's not the game they're designing, so it's not useful. See, all this stuff kind of is circular. It kind of feeds into itself. Ask questions. Or if the person whose game you're playtesting asks you a question, answer it. Don't be as concerned with hurting their feelings as it is easy to be. Obviously, designers' egos are wrapped up in their creations. They don't want to hear that, their game is nails on a chalkboard to you, but that might be exactly what they need to hear. And you don't have to phrase it in a way that is upsetting to the designer. Your game sucks, you suck, this is terrible, why would you ask me to do this? I can't believe I wasted my time. That's totally useless. That's just a good way to make everybody at the table feel uncomfortable and or upset. But giving them feedback is what they're there for. That's why the playtest exists. If they didn't want feedback, then they shouldn't be playtesting. And some feedback is going to be negative. Some feedback is going to be positive. Some feedback is going to be just like totally neutral. Like, you know, there's some feedback that I get that I honestly don't know what I should do with. I have to ruminate on it and think about it. And I don't immediately have an answer for what to do with it at the table. That's why I take notes in one of these handy-dandy little journals that 1000 XP has. Or why I, you know, think on it a couple of days or even a week before I make any official changes to a prototype. You know, first of all, you don't want to be changing it constantly. You want to only make changes when you have to, because manufacturing a new prototype takes time. But also, you know, let it stew for a bit. And so, as a playtester, you're giving them the ingredients for that stew. You know, like, that's what they're going to be ruminating on. That's what they're going to be using for their next update. So answering their questions is really useful. Volunteering information is also useful. Giving a bit of information about your gaming style and what you're interested in gives them a frame of reference for your feedback. Being honest seems like a duh, but it's not always something that people are willing to do because they're not quite sure how to phrase their honesty in a way that isn't hurtful. So some tips there. Don't get focused on whether or not the game is good or not. That's not what a designer's looking for, is whether or not the game is good. Tell them how the game makes you feel. Like, does the game make you feel frustrated? Does this part of the game make you feel like you have no control over things? Let them know those kinds of things. Like, if the game feels totally chaotic and random to you, that's nice, but what makes it feel that way? What has it feel that way? Or what pieces of the experience are making it feel chaotic and random? If it feels like there's only one way to win, you know, how do you see that? Like, you don't have to sit down and do the math for them, although some designers might appreciate that. It depends on the designer. Like, you know, saying, like, it just feels like this strategy is the only way to win. Now, you may not be right. Don't be attached to being right. You're not there to defend a thesis. You're not there to, you know, challenge them as the devil's advocate. Give them your opinion and move on. Give them your feedback and move on. Like, it's not, or it shouldn't be, personal for you. It's not your game. You know, it's not, there's no skin off your back if the game doesn't work well. You're not the publisher, typically. You're not, you know, putting any money into it. You're not investing in the game. You've invested some time, which designers appreciate, but, you know, focusing on whether or not the game is good or not isn't going to do anybody any good. It's cool if you think it is. Designers love to hear that people think that their games are good. Designers typically don't like to hear that people think that their games are bad. But designers do like to hear where things aren't working for people, or where things break down, or how it makes you feel in various aspects of things. One example of that is playing my game Fire in the Library with people. You know, some of the feedback that I got was that it was really awkward to remove the book cubes from the bag as they burned. Like, over the course of the game, there are fewer and fewer books in the library because it's on fire. But it kind of took people out of the flow of things to, oh, well, you know, these books burned, so now I have to go grab a book of this color out of the bag and remove it permanently from the bag. It was so much easier to just add more fire. Statistically, it's a little bit different, but it's not different enough that it makes that much of a difference. Like, it changes the math slightly, but it changes the feel a lot. To have some fire sitting on the table and to be adding fire to the bag, symbolizing the fire growing more, was something that only came out of playtesting. Because mathematically, or, you know, just on paper, everything worked. Even at the table, the old way worked, but there was a feeling there that took you out of the moment. And it's like a quick pressure luck game. And that's one thing that's really, like, that playtesting can really spot. But it was after multiple playthroughs, getting that same feedback from multiple people, like, hey, I played this, and it really felt really awkward pulling this stuff out of the, bag. You know, wouldn't it just be easier to add more fire to the bag? And it changes component costs, and that changes the math slightly and all of this stuff. But once you hear it enough from enough people, and then play it that way, and see that the breakdown's no longer occurring, that people don't come out of the flow, that the game moves much better, you have that as an example to go forward. So when you're playing other people's games, look for things like that. Like, what feels clunky? What takes you out of the game? Whether that's taking you out of the metagame or taking you out of the thematic elements of the game. I'm not as huge on theme. Like, I like my games to have a theme. I love unique themes. I love it when the theme helps inform, like, I can use the theme to help understand how the game works. But, like, the example with fire in the library, adding more fire to the bag and burning up books thematically are very similar. Mechanically, both are rationalized inside the course of the theme. Obviously, the fire spreads, so you add more fire. Or, you know, the books burn up, so there are fewer of them. Both rationally make sense inside the context of the theme. Neither one's theme breaking. One just plays better at the table. So look for things like that. Look for what could keep the theme or keep what the designer is going for without, you know, redesigning their game or suggesting all of the different kinds of mechanics you might like to see in the game. Another thing to do is don't be worried about whether you win or not. I know that's hard. It's very hard for some people to sit down to play a game and not do their best to win. And I'm not saying to not try your best to win. I'm saying don't be attached to winning as a playtester. The game may not work. Like I said earlier, the game may stop halfway through because it's obvious that something isn't working right. So don't be too attached to winning. Obviously, try to carry out a strategy. Try to do something inside the context of the questions that the designer may have. But you know, win or lose in a playtest is largely irrelevant. Playtests are for gathering data beyond who won and who lost. And you know, if you won a playtest game, yay, I'm happy for you. If you lost a playtest game, yay, I'm happy for you. You playtested a game. That's kind of what it comes down to for me. Playtesting is something that all designers appreciate, that makes such a huge difference. Like, the games that we create do not exist without playtesters. We don't get to where we are in our designs without playtesters. We can't playtest it all ourselves. We can't just do the math in a spreadsheet and then construct the game and have it work amazingly out the gate. That doesn't happen even for the best of us. We've got to have that test drive, that experience on the table, to really kind of proof our ideas and see if some of our ideas, while sound, don't play well at the table. You know, where the rubber hits the road is what matters, and playtesters are what take it out there for a spin and show us where our safety measures could be improved, where we could maybe add a little bit more throttle, or where the gear shifting is a little bit clunky, so that we can, when it finally rolls off of the assembly line, everything purrs like a kitten and does exactly what you would expect it to. But yeah. So those are some things that you can do as a playtester. I know I kind of went into designer territory there in how to interact with playtesters, or you know, what you're looking for in a playtest, but it all kind of goes hand in hand. Like, no game is produced by one person. Every game is a group effort. It's one of the reasons why I love this hobby. I love working with groups of people, and playtesters are extremely valuable things. And knowing how to approach playtesting is an extremely valuable skill. And if you want to become a designer's best friend, you know, hone that skill. Figure out how to improve that. If you're a designer, work on that as well. Play other people's games. It will not only improve your skill at playtesting, it will improve your skill at designing, because you'll start to see how other systems interact with each other. I play other people's games not just to give them a hand, but to improve myself. So everybody's at winning. Even if the scores don't necessarily reflect that or matter at all, like in Whose Line Is It Anyway? So that's that. I just wanted to kind of talk about that for a little while. Thank you guys again, and I will talk to you later.